you why you should listen to me. So I'm the founder and data science consultant at Enterprise AI Consulting. Formerly, I have worked at Celonis, a startup, well, not so much a startup anymore, based out of Munich, as well as KPMG, one of the big 4 consulting companies. And what I do, I formulate it in a pretty simple way. I analyze data of companies and organizations to build AI solutions that matter and develop P&L, profit and loss relevant applications. So at the core of what I do is working with data and trying to derive insights, find patterns in that data that will help company improve their operational results. A couple of words about my company. So it's a data science consultancy with a focus on helping clients to achieve great things, as we call it, or build solutions that matter. Currently, there are 4 people in the company, including myself. I have started it last year, officially in March, not so officially in July, let's say. Currently, we're based out of Munich, Berlin, and Barcelona, and have completed already a bunch of projects and built a small partner network that we work with on different projects together with. So much about myself, now let's have a look at the agenda, what we have for today. So as I mentioned already briefly, it's going to be a dense webinar in terms of information, and it's also one of the reasons why I wanted to have it at 2 p.m. and not in the evening. I wanted you participants to be relatively fresh hopefully after lunch with a lot of energy. So 4 points that we're going to be talking about. So the first one is, why does AI matter? Like, why you should care about this technology and which kind of stuff can it create in the world. Second part is about applied AI for business, which means we're going to be looking at different use cases of artificial intelligence across business functions such as customer service, procurement, and so on and so forth, as well as we're going to look at 3 case studies, meaning past projects that I and my company have executed. And I'm going to walk you through what was important there and why companies cared about it. In part 3, we're going to be looking at how to use AI in your projects or in your companies, in your startups, whatever you're doing. Essentially, it's going to be a deep dive into the methodology that we're using, more of a conceptual framework, how you should work with AI to achieve success in your projects. Part 4 are going to be a couple of next steps, or the summary of the webinar, and a couple of next steps for the future. So why does AI matter? Well, I prefer usually to start with definition of the subject that I'm talking about, because many people understand these kind of topics such as AI in different ways. And there are many different definitions for artificial intelligence. One of them is that it's a branch of computer science that deals with simulation of human behavior on computers. Another one mostly talks about intelligent and the imitation of the intelligent human behavior. Another approach is more or less like a catchphrase, so to say, as soon as it becomes possible, it's not AI anymore, by Pamela McCorduck. Essentially, it means that, well, 20 years ago, for example, before the deep learning revolution, natural language processing, text understanding, and image recognition was at, let's say, its nascency and not very developed. And at the time, those were considered advanced AI technologies. Currently, it's kind of a back pocket tool that data scientists use every day, and mostly is described with the deep learning word or notion, let's say, rather than AI on its own. And on this slide, I would like to present the definition of AI, how I understand it and how I follow it in my business. Artificial intelligence is a series of methods in computer science and software development that can learn patterns and relationships from data and make predictions based on them. So it's a very generic definition, I would say. But the beauty of it is that it's quite practical about learning patterns and relationships and also making predictions. You also understand that it's something that has to do with computers. It doesn't talk about simulation of behaviors, because the simulation of behaviors is quite a complex topic, very debatable in the philosophy of mind and the philosophy of artificial intelligence as well. So I'm trying to be very practical and, as the title of this talk suggests, applied. And the goals of AI are also diverse. I have put 3 of them on the slide: the optimization of resource consumption, and those could be like raw materials, this kind of resources. But you can also look at the time as a resource, and thus accelerating business processes or optimizing them would be one of the goals of AI. Automating operational decisions and measures that you take in day-to-day life is another one, as well as sustainable improvement in financial results, the profit and loss effects that have been mentioned. And a couple of words about how AI works, again, so that we are on the same level of understanding and that we know, let's say, which type of approach we're talking about. So in my practice, I mostly work with data from different company systems, such as ERP systems, enterprise resource planning, CRM, customer relationship management, and so on and so forth. And I work mostly with data on, let's say, orders, purchase orders from the company, or customer contracts, production orders, service tickets for customer service management, and so on and so forth. On the bottom, you can see different IT systems that are used and essentially serve as a data source, Datenquelle, for the analysis of the data. In the second step, what you do, you need to create the information basis. You do it through extracting the data from your source system on the left side, and you put it somewhere else in the database, generally speaking. And you also would need to clean this data, as well as create so-called analytical base table, or ABT, which is going to be the table that you train your machine learning models on. Number 3, or let's say step 3, is essentially applying AI. You build models, you automate decision making, you automate and optimize processes, and so on and so forth to achieve some sustainable results. And here you would use Python, you would use Celonis or other BI tools like Scikit-learn and so on, different libraries from Python. You don't need to remember all of them really, but just so that you know the notions. And of course, I'll also share slides afterwards so you can look at all of them in peace. With that, I would like to, let's say, not really take a short break, but at least invite you to write about your understanding of AI, how it is or how it was before the couple of slides that I have presented. Please write in the chat how you understand it, and I hope we'll have a bit of time to come back to it at the end of the webinar. Another point why AI is important, very simple. The value creation potential is immense, it's huge. This number, 15.7 trillion, is the estimation of PwC, a Big 4 audit company, about how much value AI will add to the global economy until 2030. Just for comparison, currently the global gross domestic product of the world is about 86, 87 trillion. By 2030, let's say it's going to be 100 trillion. So we can see that, well, 16% of the global economy will be powered by artificial intelligence, which is kind of cool. Another point is that, excuse me, the market is huge. So meaning that the companies like mine, the enterprise AI consulting, but also the Googles and Microsofts of this world, and Databricks and whatever company that's involved in the data and AI space are making money. And the total market is estimated to grow to $118 billion in revenue by 2025. Of course, estimates are not always true, but the market is well, multi-billion-dollar market already, and it's growing very fast. So currently, we say that there's going to be space for everybody in the market. If you ever will want to start an AI company, keep that in mind. Another thing that I wanted to show you were the examples of what AI can do right now. Those are more of examples for fun, let's say. I will also show you more applied examples later on. But just so you can see what artificial intelligence is currently capable of, let's have a look at the
Dear fellow Scout.
This one I will put on mute because you just need to watch it, and I will, let's say, comment. So what this game is doing, there are the blue guys and the red guys on this stage, and they're running around, and they're running around chaotically. So they are not programmed. It's so-called reinforcement learning approach, where they just run around, and the red ones need to spot the blue ones, and the blue ones need to hide. And the blue ones need to develop a strategy of how to hide. As you can see here, they start moving the boxes to block the red ones from entering the room. And again, just to stress it out, it's not programmed. This is something that is happening on its own. It's the machine is actually learning the strategy of how to move these blue and red folks on the stage. As you can see, now they hide from their red aggressors, attackers, however you call it. And they do it again and again, and the red ones are also learning. The red ones are trying to, to catch them. eventually. So what the red ones do, they take a ramp. You can see they take a ramp. Oh, it's a little bit buggy, sorry. And the red one jumps over the fence to spot the blue ones. And it's happening again and again. And let me see where it happens. Oh, what? Yeah, and here the blue one understands what's going on, and you can see that they first grab the ramp inside of their little room, and only then they block the entrances. And again, just to remind you, this is all learned. Nothing of it is programmed, just the environment and the existence of the agents. This blue and red thingies are called agents in reinforcement learning, but the rest is completely learned. Another example is voice generation, which is pretty amazing. In this short video, I will not show you the whole one because it's 4 minutes long, but just have a, if it loads, yeah, as you can see, all voices are entirely computer generated. And now let's just, oh my goodness, 1 second. Just have a listen.
And it's her. I just don't understand. What did I do?
Faith, there's something you need to know.
Mom, don't leave me. You can't just go.
You need to find out for yourself.
All right. Again, not to take a lot of time. You're going to be having an opportunity to listen to the whole video if you want. But just from this short bit, I guess you notice the quality. That's the only point that I wanted to make. Both of these voices, the mother and the daughter, they have been completely AI generated, and they sound very realistic. It's not just a robotic voice that you used to hear in this, bank customer service phone lines and so on. But these are voices of normal humans, right? They breathe, they change intonation, they have voice inflections, they don't speak perfectly. And it might sound like silly, right? Because people all don't speak perfectly, and I also am not speaking perfectly right now, of course. But it is actually very hard to achieve for AI. But since recently, about a year ago, this is the state of the art, and it's improving actually every month, more or less. So currently, there are also probably better voice generating algorithms out there. And again, these two, I just wanted to hopefully impress you a little bit. If you have the questions to these examples, feel free to write them in the chat. With that though, we'll come back to more serious stuff, the applied AI for business and more, as I call it. So why business? I mean, that's essentially because of my personal background. AI can be applied not only in business, of course, and when I say business, I rather mean organization, not necessarily a for-profit company. So any kind of organization that you can think of. But of course, there are also a lot of fun applications. There are applications for entertainment or gaming, which would not be included here. But again, to have some focus, that's the context that we are going forward with. So the use cases, the exemplary use cases that I wanted to show you, I have grouped them according to different business functions. And business function in an organization is something that is doing a specific, like having a specific role in customer service, for example. And in customer service, you have things like resolution time predictions, meaning how quickly a certain ticket is going to be solved, right? Or urgency detection and ticket tagging means essentially when a new ticket comes in, for example, you're an, I don't know, Telefonica customer, as I am. And it's not an ad, it's just an example. And I called their customer service, which is horrible, by the way. They might hear that my voice is angry, or if I type it in the email, they might see that I'm using the words that show that I'm angry, or I'm using a lot of exclamation marks or whatever, and they might prioritize my request because they know, well, this dude seems to be angry and he might need to get help as soon as possible. Next one is upsell prediction. That would be the reverse situation when I really like their services and I'm like, hey, O2, what do you think if I would be, purchasing a new contract, which is going to be not like, I don't know, 20 euro per month, but 50 euro per month. And using AI to recognize this kind of intention in customer, would be an upsell prediction, and as well the common example of chatbots that would be answering different kinds of customer requests around the clock. Not all of them are AI powered, let's be honest, but some of them are. Technology is mostly called NLP, or natural language processing. That's the category of technologies, let's say. Another business function is sales. This is a very popular one, let's say, because sales, of course, is something that drives revenue. At least in for-profit organization, that's probably the most desired one. Like, everybody gets super hot when we start talking about AI use cases for sales, and there are a bunch of things there. You could predict conversions, for example, and you can do this for your potential customers or prospects, as they're called. You can evaluate the probability of how likely they are to buy your services or products. Another use case is automated data entry. It's when, instead of copy pasting the customer data from an email, you would use an AI engine that would recognize different entities such as address or IBAN or whatever, and would put those information into your system. And of course, performance analysis of sales conversations. It's something like to identify the best performing person, which is not very well seen in Germany in particular, but generally in companies, sales managers usually want to know which sales representative performs the best, and try to understand which kind of wording they use, which kind of timing they use, and you can analyze those patterns with artificial intelligence. Another example is in production, and the production is also a big case, and the strongest in Germany, I have to say, because, well, Germany is an engineering-heavy country in general, and there are a lot of cases in predictive maintenance, defect detection, a little bit less in generative design. So predictive maintenance is when you try to predict when your machines are going to break down, or your customers' machines. Defect detection means that you are producing some parts, and especially popular in small parts, like, I don't know, some Schrauben, I forgot what they're called in English, but let's say some small metal details, and instead of looking at them, a person looking at them, you could train a neural net, for example, for image recognition tasks that would try to spot defects on this part, like something is cracked or something is broken, and detect those automatically. And generative design is, in my opinion, one of the most exciting spheres, because it's not just about automation and optimization, the two areas where AI is mostly used, but also creation of something, because generative design means that you would design those mechanical parts, for example, or interior design, so pretty much whatever, with AI, and the designs appear to be not like the ones a human engineer would design, which is kind of really cool. There was a famous case from Airbus. They designed like parts of their plane with generative AI, and those were like 30% lighter and so on, and human engineers kept saying that we would never think of this design because it's not how humans think, which is kind of exciting, because you can see that even current iteration of AI, which is very far from really smart AI, let's put it that way, is just doing cool stuff. Next area is marketing. There are different things such as customer journey analysis and predicting which kind of next steps a customer would take, as well as next best action predictions. It's when you try to predict what your next best step is. For example, if you have a social media marketing campaign, or you have an e-commerce shop, what you as an organization need to do to drive your customers or users, or however you call them, to do a specific action. You can optimize Google AdWords or other types of performance marketing and advertising. You can generate texts for your ads and for your marketing copy, parts of your white papers, your articles, whatever you can think of. The next part is accounting. For example, this is one of the so-called support functions, which many people kind of forget about, although accounting and finance are one of the most important functions in every organization, because that's where the money flow is, right? And if you don't know how your money flows and how your finances and liquidity is, well, you're gonna be out of business. Optimization of cash management is very important for companies. That's again more on the for-profit side, not so relevant for universities or state organizations, but things like classifying documents, for example, is extremely relevant for everybody, because of course, every organization buys some stuff and sells some stuff. I need to understand, well, if it's an invoice, if it's some kind of other type of document, is the right person who issued it? Is the amount corresponding on the invoice and on the purchase requisition, and so on and so forth. And the last but not least, procurement. Here you can automate procurement approvals, for example. Essentially train the model to follow your procurement managers, right? And to extract features of the correct purchase requisitions so that you can approve most of them automatically. And there are different use cases for it. Some people say you can automate like up to 80% of the requisitions. I haven't seen in practice 80%, but you can sure automate like 20, 30, 50% depending on the complexity of your procurement process. There are also things like supplier matching, where you assess the quality of the supplier and where you can assess their offerings with AI, meaning also analyze the texts of their offering and create some scoring mechanism that would match the offering of the supplier on one side and what you need as an organization on the other side, and show you the best suppliers. And also AI-powered contract management. It's when you analyze the contracts that you have in your organization, which could be very different. It could be also with suppliers, but contract management in general also can be applied in areas other than procurement. Yeah, and of course, I'm going very briefly through them. You could talk about each of these use cases, bullet points, for an hour easily, of course. And if there are going to be more questions, or if you have questions right now, you can write them in the chat. I will try to answer them later on, but that's just to give you an overview how rich and deep the applications of artificial intelligence are already in the organizations. Also, probably important point is that many people think that you have to have a gazillion of data sets in huge data to start with AI. It's not true. And I always felt it's not true. Recently, about a month ago, I had a confirmation. I was at a webinar by Andrew N, which is one of the gurus of the AI space, one of the most famous machine learning scientists and engineers and entrepreneurs. He's one of the co-founders of Coursera. He's the founder of Lending AI. Deep Learning AI is also his specialization on Coursera. And basically, I was at his webinar, and he was making a survey, just like Anna did 10 minutes ago or something. And Andrew was also doing a survey from data scientists, and there were like 4,500 people there, asking how big are the data sets that you work with. And the mean value, so like 50% of the people have worked with a data set of 10,000 lines or less. And 10,000 lines, it's basically nothing. You can find it in almost any organization, even relatively small one, even relatively young one. So just so you know, it's much more applicable than it seems. Also, another thing that I wanted to give you the overview about the AI use case portfolio, right? You might have all of these use cases, right? A gazillion, and you're like, what do I do with them? Where do I start? And that's where you build a portfolio, where you estimate the impact that they can have in terms of, let's say, monetary impact, if that's your KPI, or you can have another KPI such as growth or innovation or talent development, anything that you want. And on the other axis, you have effort or feasibility. And you can map, well, there's also an approach to evaluate all of that, but you can map your use cases on this matrix and understand, well, what do I want to do first? And on this portfolio, on this matrix, you can see 3 use cases in black, which is response time prediction on the bottom right, conversion rate prediction on the bottom left, and in the center, you see change processes. And those are going to be the use cases that I will talk about in more detail, because those are the use cases that we have done for customers. If you are interested in some of the applications, write in the chat. For now, I'm going to have a sip of water. Briefly show you how such a solution can look like. It's an example of what we built last summer. It's a demo. It's not a customer solution because we can't show those. But it was a demo for a webinar that we did last July. Goodness, can I make it play somehow? Yeah, you have predictive maintenance. You have different sorry, my goodness, different asset types. And assets could be your machines, for example, or Anlagen in the company, or those could be machines of your customer. This was a use case for a manufacturing company, obviously. And then you can look at the maintenance costs that you have by asset category. This is not really AI, it's just descriptive statistics, but still very useful and necessary thing to know. Costs by customer, handling units. Handling units is very useful for, wait a second. This video is not really working well. I'm sorry for that, but in any case, just wanted to show you the app. Essentially, it's an AI app, quote unquote, which means that that's how it would look like in the front end, sort of, where you would have some predictive model in the background. You don't really need to know how it works, but you can use this model to improve your processes. All right, so the first case study. Is reduction in response times. So it was a case study for an online seller, basically an e-commerce company that was receiving different reviews and complaints and wanted to answer them quickly. Something that I mentioned before about customer service. So what we did was to build NLP-powered pre-screening tool. NLP means natural language processing. So a tool that analyzes human speech and tries to understand the mood of the customer or the sentiment. You know, that I mentioned, well, maybe this guy is angry. Let's look at his email first. And from these, we were able to create the so-called priority queue, right? The order of prioritization in which the tickets need to be reviewed. And thanks to that, we're able to achieve about 50% reduction in response times in this customer service center. On the right side, you can see the tools that we have used. All of these currently were Python-based tools, which is the main language of choice in the company and generally in the data science sphere. The cool part of it was, well, the NLP part, because it's not every day that you get the chance to work with NLP. NLP is a very specific field of AI, let's say, because it deals with human language. And human language, as you know, is a very vague thing, right? You can say one thing 10 different ways, or you can say also one sentence and it can be interpreted in 10 different ways. And we as humans, we understand context, so we usually don't get confused. Computers don't have the context. So the issue was that the same word or the same formulation in different contexts can be very different. So this project, for example, one of the challenges was to bring together the data from the tickets themselves, the text, but also the metadata of the ticket, like when it came, from whom, at which time, which browser, how long the person has spent in the browser searching, and so on and so forth. And we built an AI-powered solution to solve this problem. And we're going to be jumping relatively quickly because I don't have that much time and still a lot of material, but I hope it's okay. So another case study was that we did, it's kind of an old one, for an e-commerce company from the Netherlands. They wanted to know what they need to do to drive buying decisions on their customers. So e-commerce, it's kind of Amazon. We just think of Amazon, sort of. It wasn't Amazon, but anyway. And they wanted to know how to drive conversion, how to improve conversion rates. And here we use the approach that I mentioned already before, the next best action approach, which means what we as the vendor, as this e-commerce company can do to drive more conversions. And we were predicting which step will lead to desired outcome. For example, like showing a product video, offering discounts, sending a reminder, and so on. We used the approach of neural network called LSTM. It's a sequential modeling technique. Currently, there are sort of better, cooler modeling techniques, but again, this project is relatively old. And we essentially modeled the actions as a sequence of steps, and we're trying to predict one of them. And through that, we achieved about 20% of increase in the conversion rate. You can see also the tools on the right-hand side. And the final case study that I wanted to present was the analysis of compliance in a pharmaceutical company. And pharmaceutical companies have a it's a big deal for them to follow the so-called GMP rules or standards. And GMP stands for Good Manufacturing Practice. It's a set of production and quality management and distribution standards for pharmaceutical industries, food and beverage, cosmetics, that regulate how they are supposed to work in a very precise and strict manner. And the problem is, especially for pharmaceuticals companies, is that if you make a mistake somewhere in the process, and then an auditor, a GMP auditor comes and they find the mistake, they may take your drug off the market. And for pharmaceutical companies, it means huge losses, right? It's direct monetary loss. So they want to avoid those compliance mistakes. So what we did was to map out the change process for changing different materials or constituent parts of different drugs. Let's say one was replaced, or one was replaced with another from a different vendor, supplier, whatever. And we were trying to predict the non-conforming, non-compliant steps. And when you can predict in advance, you can avoid it, right? You don't have to take the action. It will be non-compliant. You can talk to your colleagues. You can change your standards, do whatever it takes, essentially, to avoid non-compliance. And thanks to this case, to predicting the non-compliant steps, we were able to achieve more or less 100% compliance in the change process. All right, so good for the case studies. Hope it was helpful. If you have questions about them, write them in the chat. And now we come to the almost the final content part, at least, of the webinar. How to use AI in your project, right? The methodology part that I mentioned in the beginning. Let me take a sip of water. So I'm going to be very frank with you. So this process is a general level process. The exact actions and steps will differ for every project, but at the same time, I believe you need this conceptual high-level understanding of how you need to proceed. And step one is to check your data. And when I say data, I don't mean just tables, but holistically the system that you're working with, right? The strategy of the organization or of the project that you're working on, the use case portfolio, if this organization has it, budgets, responsibilities, and so on. You need to understand also the people that are working on the project. It could be yourself, it could be your data team, it could be external consultant, and you need to know which kind of technical expertise will be necessary, how to give access to the results of your AI project, and how to develop skills of people. In terms of technology, you need to understand IT systems and tools that you have, how they're documented and how they're developed according to the roadmap. And in terms of data, of course, the most important part, you need to see which kind of data sources you have, how good the data is, how much data you have, as well as to understand the data architecture, meaning different databases and source systems and so on that you have at your disposal. There are a bunch of people that needs to be involved at different stages of this process. Decision makers, those are going to be sponsoring the project. Innovation and tech leads, that's likely yourself, somebody who's driving the project to a success. And experienced employees, those that you're building this solution for, your colleagues, or maybe your customers, depends. And employees will help you know the customer. And depending on the function that you're working in, those are going to be different people, but those are, let's say, three main groups that you need to get involved. And in step two, I would suggest you building a pilot solution. Pilot means not a huge, gigantic project, but relatively narrowly scoped project, a data app, a prototype that you build to try to solve the problem and to see if AI is the right solution at all, because it's not always the right solution. And here you can structure the process in a couple of steps, let's say sequential steps. First, you need to get data, extract it from the systems or get it from Excel and so on. Here you can see examples of those systems. You need to clean the data, replace the missing values, bring the data formats into some kind of standard way. Then you need to explore the data to understand the fundamental patterns in the data through descriptive statistics, charts, and diagrams. And also, the last part, you need to build models. And building models is the actual AI part, but the clean data part usually takes the most of the time, up to 80% of the time on the project, because once you have good data, it's actually usually not that easy to build models. And here as an example, you can see the app that I have shown before. That would be a pilot solution that we built as a demo. How to find pilots? Two major things. Let's say on one side, you need to find interfaces between departments where there's a little bit of tension, let's say, or departments are rubbing on each other because it's a source of inefficiencies. Like common examples are procurement and accounting, or production quality management, or also sales and customer success, and so on. Departments that must work together closely, but still usually have a little bit of a divergent interest, so there is some friction between them. And also places where you have outdated business models, where you have a lot of manual work and a lot of it, right? High volume. Yeah. So step 3, and it's more or less the final step in the development, let's say, of the solution. You need to integrate, roll out your AI solution on the IT systems of the company, but also you need to make sure that it's being applied in the business. Your colleagues, your employees, your customers, whoever is your end user, they need to be able to work with your AI solution. Otherwise, it's just going to be collecting dust on somebody's laptop. And the collecting dust part, unfortunately, happens in 85% of the cases, according to Gartner. So try to avoid that at all costs, I would say. Rolling out in production consists of three stages, let's say, or 3 pillars. One is data integration and orchestration. It's where you automatically now and continuously bring your whole data systems together. Next part is deployment, is when you put your AI solution from the laptop somewhere where other people can use it, and you ensure that it's scalable and available at all times. And the last point is adoption and usage. It's where you make sure that your colleagues, different departments, actually do something with your application. The adoption of AI solutions is a huge topic, huge topic. Most of the data scientists don't really care because they are interested in technology, new frameworks, new modeling techniques, whatever. They're also not usually getting paid for adoption. They're getting paid for the development. And the problem is, well, that leads to the situation where 85% of the projects are never adopted, so nobody's using them. And I don't think it's really cool, because let's see, like you spend 3 months or a year to build a project, to build a solution, and then nobody cares. I personally find it really frustrating, so I always fight with my, not necessarily fight, but fight for the adoption in the organizations of my clients. There are 2 main problems: the resistance to change, that people just don't want to change the way they work, and also fear of job replacement, that people are afraid that the solution will kick them out of work. The latter one is a fear of many people. And just to calm you down, it's not something that really is going to happen in the next 10 years too much. I mean, a little bit in some areas probably, but AI is rather notorious for creating new kinds of services where new employment is being created. And about 2 years ago, I've been at a presentation of the Bavarian Ministry of Work. I think that's the translation. In any case, they made a study, and they came to the conclusion that it's going to be like 100,000 or something like that more how you call it, working places in Bavaria thanks to AI in the net terms. So some of them will be lost, some of them will be created, but the net effect will be positive, which is kind of cool. All right, after the project, you need to do the AI roadshow. Again, I'm jumping really quickly because we don't have much time. But when the app is ready, it's really important to communicate it in the organization, to basically show it everybody you can show it to. to your colleagues, other departments, management, partners of the organization, whoever you can find, show it to them. First of all, they're going to give you feedback so you can improve. Second of all, you're going to get recognition and you can improve your career. You can become an innovator in your organization and somebody that people aspire to work with. Couple of words about the team roles. I split them into business and tech. On business side, you need some executive leadership support, probably department lead on your side, team lead, and function specialist, let's say accounting or sales, customer service, the ones that I mentioned. On the tech side, you will need a data engineer. That's the one that brings the data together from disparate IT systems. Data scientist that cleans the data, builds models, and so on. And IT support mostly to give you all the access necessary. In terms of skill, again, split according to business and tech. On the business side, strategy, team management, and change management especially, that's important for adoption. And on the tech side, depends very much on what you're building, but generally speaking, ETL, extract, transform, load, or the extraction of data will be important. SQL, the language for database, working with databases, different ERP and different IT systems, data lakes, knowledge of statistics, Python, machine learning, and data visualization. If you have questions about the methodology, feel free to write them. I'm almost done, and we're going to jump into questions in a minute. A couple of words about the next steps. So just to remind you what we have learned what is AI and why it's important. We have looked through, I don't know, 20 different small use cases and 3 major case studies. As well, we had a look at the methodology and the process of implementing a data science or AI project. So what's next? Well, if you actually want to do it, if you like the introduction to applied AI and you want the continuation of applied AI, you need to do a couple of things. From the business perspective, such as understanding the organization where you work, because, well, unless you're a completely new startup, then you need to know where you find yourself in. Even if you're a startup, you still need to understand the companies that you work with, your customers, your partners, and which kind of people are there. Second thing is planning the project. So how are you going to proceed, setting the milestones, objectives, timeline, and so on. And of course, executing the project. And executing the project means what I mentioned before, these 3 steps, right? Understanding the data, building the pilot, and building the productive integration. That's a lot of coding, basically. You have to sit at your laptop, you or your colleagues or your friends, and code a lot. And about all of that, I'm gonna talk much more in detail in the workshop that Anna has mentioned, Project Management for Data Science, on May 26th, 27th. You can register over the email, founders@unibw.de. And with that, I just wanted to say thank you, Anna. Also, thanks to Filipa and Rafaela, who invited me to the webinar, to the workshop, and made this whole thing possible. And with that, I will stop sharing and use the last couple of minutes to look through your questions.